right, everybody. Let's get started. Last week we didn't do intros, and I put up a doc, but I forgot to put up a doc for questions this week. So let's go around real quick and just a quick introduction and anything you found interesting in the readings or questions or things you want to talk about. Parker, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm Parker. Been at kind of just left DCG after about 4 years, doing some stuff there. And in terms of rollups, I guess I'm just trying to get my head around. It seems like with just how data availability fits into it as it relates to some of the other infrastructure projects that are going out and how they may dovetail. Just really kind of curious to see how some of the other entities in the space might fill the gaps for the scaling roadmap as it was previously contemplated, and just kind of interested to explore what that ecosystem could look like in a year or two.
Nikolai?
Yeah, I'm Nikolai. I've been a co-founder at a company called Clay, which is a low-code Web 2 company, let's call it. And I have just departed, and I'm kind of like at the beginning of exploring Web 3 more seriously. I don't have any particular questions for today, but just spending time like exploring different protocols and seeing where some of the frictions are.
Cool. Lane?
Hey guys, I'm Lane. I do blockchain layer 1 R&D. And yeah, I find kind of this modular blockchains, I don't know, thesis idea, like quite interesting and quite exciting. It's very relevant for the work I'm doing on Space Mesh. We're in an interesting place where we're like putting finishing touches on our layer 1 design, and like understanding this thesis has definitely, and just what's happening with rollups and stuff has already had an impact on our roadmap. So super relevant, and still trying to get my head around it.
David?
Yeah, I'm Dave. I've been in crypto since like 2012, 13, but kind of in and out, paying attention as I was doing my PhD. I'm a mathematician, and kind of the last year I've been focusing more on like understanding the whole ecosystem. And lately I've been kind of focused on Solana and investing in a couple projects there, and doing some on-chain analysis stuff. Hire some devs to help me out. I'm not a dev myself. Yeah, I mean, Zk Rollups. I guess my main question is like, does this add kind of a centralized point of failure with Starkware? I think that's, I don't know. I wasn't here last week. I don't know if you guys talked about anything like that, but yeah, that's it.
Cool. Terrence?
Hey everyone, I'm Terrence. I am a software engineer and have been doing quite a bit of development on layer 2s recently, primarily Optimism and StarkNet. So excited to chat with you guys.
Ralph?
Hey guys, I'm a software engineer, and I've been thinking a lot about layer 2 from an application developer's perspective. But I think today we'd love to dig in on some of the questions opened in the reading. Some of the questions mentioned in the reading, like what's valuable and where does value accrue in this new system, especially if we ignore like some asset getting a monetary premium, like which assets are, earning cash or have pricing power. Is the question I'm interested in.
Cool. Ishamar and Dan said they were just going to listen. I'm Blake, co-founder of Crypto NYC. We've been doing this Zk Rollups. This is the 5th session we've done, and today we are going to focus on MEV and the economics of like the L1 chain and value accrual. Raf, do you want to kick off the conversation do you have any thoughts on value accrual?
I have some thoughts, but I think it's just really hard to predict how it will play out. I think a good place to start is what's happening now. Like what's happening now on Ethereum is ETH is valuable kind of for several reasons. I mean, and they kind of support each other. So if you don't believe one narrative, you can believe another one. You know, one narrative is the deflation, like the fee burn from EIP 159, and that's because block space is really scarce and really valuable. So there's lots of demand to buy block space and on Ethereum, and the only seller is the only way to buy this to pay ETH to miners for or sequencers for it. But also ETH has a monetary premium, and also ETH has just like this nebulous narrative of like, well, ETH is going to be big, so Ethereum will be big, and you don't have to understand why. People are just willing to have a speculative premium on it. And I think what I wanted to talk through is how many of those things, like speculative premium, which maybe eventually goes away, the monetary premium, which can last forever, and then the pricing power is, I think, the one that's easiest to reason about in the abstract. Like which things will be scarce. Is block space still scarce, or what kind of block space is still scarce, and who is selling it, and is there a competition in that market? So I think that's where I was thinking is about that first point, because the other ones, who knows?
Yeah.
But it does seem to me that block space for like regular transactions won't be scarce, although block space for putting proofs on the best settlement layer might be scarce, especially if Ethereum like goes to smaller blocks, which they could if there's no other good settlement layer.
Can you talk through really quick, just to make sure we're all on the same page, EIP 1559, like just so we're all on the same page as far as like how the like inflation deflation sort of works and like the block size adjusts?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of nuance or a bunch of technical details, but I think the big idea with EIP 1559 for pricing is that what used to happen is before EIP 1559, users would pay miners fees to have their transaction included in a block. And the miners would then get the fees, and then that's their profit. They would use that to generally bid against each other for better hardware, better electricity, and then they would have to sell the ETH to buy dollars or yuan to pay their electricity bills. But what happened with EIP 159 is not all of the fee goes to miners. Some of it is just straight up burned. And that means that there is deflation. Like there is people who will buy ETH to pay fees, and then the ETH gets burned, and it's not given to any miner or anyone, so it doesn't get back into it doesn't re-enter the market. So there's like a permanent negative emissions. If there's enough demand, which in the past few months there has been, you can get negative emissions. So more ETH is destroyed than created in miner rewards. And that's created a lot of deflation. That's been one narrative driving the price, and probably also one like actual mechanic driving the price over the past 6 months. I think this thing went live in middle of last year, middle of 2021.
And so the rough like economic cycle is, as there's more demand for block space, we end up with a deflationary Ethereum, right? We're burning more Ethereum than we are issuing in supply. If there's more demand for block space and we're burning Ethereum, like that should have some sort of positive impact on the Ethereum price, right? And then if there's less demand for Ethereum block space, we have an inflationary situation, right? And that should have a negative impact on the price, right? Or did I get that backwards?
No, that's right.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't remember if Raf just now mentioned also the transition to proof of stake, because that's also like highly relevant in the Ethereum economics. You did? Okay. Yeah.
I did not mention it.
No,
okay.
You didn't.
Yeah. So issuance has been hovering in the neighborhood of 3 to 4% per year for the past few years. I mean, it came down, right? We lowered it a couple times. And as Raf pointed out, with the IP 1559, which went live in August, it varies from day to day and week to week. But when demand is high, there can actually be more burning than issuance. So actually has been periods of deflationary time. But the transition to proof of stake, which is pretty much definitely going to happen. I mean, I know this is like kind of like the joke, the soon TM thing in Ethereum. you know, it was supposed to happen years ago, but like it is actually going to happen this year with the merge, which is coming up quite soon. That will lower primary issuance from the 3 to 4% range to below 1%. Right. So if you combine that with the IP 1559, I think this is a big, if not the biggest driver in the price of ETH since all this kind of became clear a few months ago. And maybe that's priced in now, who knows?
Let me ask a quick question. Raphael, you were saying that you think that there will be sufficient block space for kind of regular transactions. What kind of like time frame are you thinking with that? Because to me, it seems like there's a lot of projects that need just a gigantic amount of block space. And kind of my thesis is that there's almost kind of an infinite demand for at least L1 block space and even good L2 block space. If you look at all the gaming and social media and everything that's going to be coming on the market, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm talking specifically L2 block space. I think that it's kind of unlimited if you're willing to use a volition. Like it depends what data availability solution you want, but it does seem to me that with composable Zk rollups like layer 2 and layer 3 Zk rollups, it seems pretty unlimited, just limited by it scales like logarithmically. So it's like pretty good scaling properties for more transactions.
Right. But what do you think the time frame of like how is the demand and supply going to compete over the next few years? Do you have like a sense of that? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I think that's an open question. I think that's on the agenda and a good question. My guess is the Zk stuff will start to work end of this year, but won't have any liquidity or usage until like middle to late 2023. But kind of just making that up. I don't have very much information.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I wanted to take the conversation next, is like just reasoning through. I'm curious to hear like what people think of this. The analogy that I always think about is traffic, and there's this like property of traffic, right, where like every time you expand a road, it immediately fills up, right? And so there's kind of like infinite demand for roads, and as you reduce congestion, you like incentivize usage of something. And so I've been trying to reason about Ethereum, and it doesn't feel to me like there's infinite demand. Clearly, like demand responds to price, and as we move to L2, like the story we've kind of like come up with as a group over the last couple sessions is like, yeah, we kind of believe this like Zk rollup settle to Ethereum L1 story, right? And if like that's going to happen over the next like year or two, assuming that it will, we'll probably have like a 20,000x like increase in essentially like the supply of block space, and transactions should really like fall in terms of price by like hopefully like 99% or like something like that, or maybe even larger. So I think there's this question of like what does the supply and demand curve actually look like for block space? Is it true that there's like all this latent demand like above like below like X price? Like right now it's like, oh, if a transaction is $100, well, that's like pricing out all this demand for transactions that would happen at a lower price. Is it true that if you like increase supply by like 20,000x, that there is all this demand at cheaper prices? I'm curious of what people think.
I think the answer is definitely yes, and I think a lot of that hasn't even been explored because it just wasn't economically feasible. Like if you look at things like social media, where if you want to try to keep everything on chain or something, I mean that's just an incredible amount of bandwidth that's needed, right? Or just microtransactions from like browsing online, things like that. I mean, there's the sky's the limit, and I think just so much of this just hasn't got off the ground because it just hasn't been economically feasible. And I think you're starting to see some of that development in Solana, where transaction costs are so much cheaper. Like there's a lot of experimentation and I mean, we see in Solana, I mean, the network's getting flooded right now, and so clearly clearly demand is exceeding supply, even for like the limited amount of stuff that's even going on Solana right now. And there's like going to be a lot more in the short term. So we'll see how that keeps up. But I definitely think the supply, the demand will be there.
Cool. Parker?
Sorry, I didn't know you wanted to. I was gonna say too, like when I think about databases, right? Like there's this other thing, like if you have like additional space, like you can also store cache versions that like represent the state in the version that you want it to consume it in. And you can like there's always that trade-off of like, hey, let me like reformat this data into exactly the state that I want to consume it in a view. And I think you see the graph doing some of that with like indexing, right? Like there's like some analogy there where they're not doing a lot of the, I guess the actual stuff gets stored in Postgres databases. But there's an interesting question of like, will a bunch of this like cache materialized data also live on chain? And like, if it becomes infinitely cheap, like maybe you would do that, right? Like that kind of happened in database technology world where there was a shift to these types of databases for a time there, where people would store like materialized versions of the data, of the views they want.
I think just one slight pivot too. I think somebody in the Crypto NYC chat mentioned something I thought was pretty accurate about how value is probably going to accrue to just the applications themselves, more so than anything else. I mean, I think that like it's been interesting to kind of see some of the apps that are kind of either just on Arbitrum or Optimism, some of them that are sufficiently novel, I think, are starting to just get a lot of traction. So I imagine that all of the supply will be taken advantage of, but it's probably going to take, some apps that make the promise, and just make it manifest before people will, take the extra step to bridge assets, or maybe that's just another design challenge that a project team would take on in terms of just to make the whole process seamless. But as I see it, I think it's about, I'm getting the impression that the infrastructure is about ready for prime time for the next year, but I feel like it's going to take, or at least for some experiments, but it's going to be the apps that will really capture people's attention rather than just the infrastructure.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I just have a question. I haven't like actually tried any of these like L2 chains. Like, what is their status? Like, can you actually put stuff on there right now? Are they like in beta access? Like, what's going? Can you sign up and give it a spin?
Arbitrum's pretty live. Like you could go really play with that. The ZK stuff, like on the Starkware side, DYDX is like the largest app that's running there, and it's like sort of full steam ahead. But you have to. They rewrote their entire app like from scratch. I think the transpiler that they're working on for their Cairo language is, I think, probably like 6 months to a year till that's like fully like good to go. So like there's a big difference between the optimistic stuff where you can just like deploy right now, versus like the ZK stuff is kind of like in between.
My quick take on this is that once you're in one of these L2 ecosystems, it's fine. It feels very normal. It's actually very refreshing to be in a place where transactions are confirmed quickly and they're very cheap, like the very old days in Ethereum. But the problem is the bridges are really bad, like just fucking terrible, like absolutely apocalyptically bad right now. That's been my experience.
Bad in what way? Like just like
every way you can imagine, like unreliable. Like you go to this, you're like, okay, what is the official bridge, right? Because a bridge is just a smart contract. Like I don't want to send my assets into some, fly by night thing that's going to disappear. I need to know that bridge is reliable. I'll be able to pull the assets out later. So my experience bridging things has been like, I don't know which one's the official bridge. They're often unmaintained. There's multiple of them.
It's terrifying. There's
huge delays in finality. It can take hours. Like it's a fucking disaster. So interop is really bad. That's my quick response.
What do you guys think about kind of AMOs and bridges kind of combining, at least in some projects with, do you think that trend's going to continue where, we'll just try and obfuscate bridging entirely for some apps?
What's an AMO?
You mean MMOs? Sorry, the automated market makers, AMMs?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. AMMs, right?
I know Wormhole is actually, so Wormhole is the kind of somewhat official bridging mechanism for Solana, and I know Wormhole is working on that right now, where they'll be connecting directly to EVM compatible chains and AMM. So it'll be kind of like one click to deploy, Solana native tokens or Sol or whatever it is into EVM AMMs and vice versa, I think.
Does anybody know, or is there any way to like analyze this with any level of rigor? Like what is the actual what is actually determining the Ethereum price right now? Like how much of the price is a pure function of like supply and demand, and how much of it is a purely like speculative premium? Does anybody know? Do we have any sense?
Anybody's guess. I mean, there's been attempts in the past. Like I know Chris Berdisky did really good work on this back in like 2017 on coming up with models for pricing, but like the world has changed since then. It's hard, man. I mean, I did this for 6 years at a hedge fund, like not in crypto, just like trying to understand pricing of stocks and bonds and things like that. And we call this price attribution, and it's very, very difficult. It's like an art, not a science.
Because I'm just like trying to just like come up with some simple model in my head.
So, okay, so what you could do, and probably someone has done this, and if not, someone should, is just do a simple regression analysis. Just look at the mint versus the burn, the like net issuance of ETH, and like regress that against the price. Like I'd be really curious to see what that would say.
You could also try to model it like a revenue earning asset, like how much profit does ETH make, and then what's the growth multiple. It wouldn't be a great analogy, but you'd be comparing it to some well-known pricing stuff. But
I mean, I feel like the elephant in the room in these conversations, like people have done good work on this and sophisticated models, but the elephant in the room is that like we all have a gut feeling that 90, pick your number, 95, 98% of it is speculation. And like to me, this is clear because things like Shiba Inu exist. So it's like there is no rationale really at the end of the day, at least not yet. Maybe someday the market will be more efficient.
Well, but I think for ETH though, like this was something John and I have talked about like last year. Like John started saying like ETH is money, right? Because he's like, I actually use ETH to purchase block space, right? And I actually demand block space in a way that like was not true historically. And so I'm curious, like just like using my own basic like supply and demand models, I'm like, okay, like if like supply expands like 20,000x over the next like year or two, I don't personally think that like demand will keep up, or at the very least it will be lagging. Like, do I expect ETH's price to go down? I honestly have no way like to reason about that. Like, maybe supply and demand are totally unrelated to the price.
ETH block space demand is totally different than demand for layer 2 block space.
Sure.
So it's not really going to be a 20,000 fold increase on ETH block space, right?
Yeah, for sure. But for sort of the ability to like transact and like using sort of the EVM, right, and settle to like L1, there'll just be so much more capacity. I also like don't have a good way to like even model out like what does the demand for L1 block space look like as a function of how much transaction volume there is on L2. It's like I don't know.
That part's easy. That part's easy. It's logarithmic. Like the demand for L1 would grow logarithmically in the demand for L2 because L2 needs to checkpoint back to L1 logarithmically. Does that make sense?
And those proofs are only getting sent like in the let's say in the Zk system, those are only getting sent when there's enough transactions to fill it up.
Yeah.
So it's purely a function of demand. Okay.
But it's complex. I mean, that's one factor, but there's always multiple factors at play.
Yeah. There's also like whales that will want to settle on Ethereum directly, right? And that'll be a big driver of price.
I'm curious, can we do like a show of hands? Like who thinks that demand will grow roughly constant with supply over the next like 3 years? Who thinks it will be just sort of keep up, or will it grow faster? Like, I guess.
Wait, can I try to add some nuance to this, which is just like,
Please.
I think we're assuming that like, yeah, to David's point, like that, like block space on layer 1 is equivalent to layer 2, and like I think of layer 2s as just bringing a bunch of demand that escaped to alt layer 1s back to Ethereum. And so like that's actually marginal to demand for Ethereum layer 1 because those people never use layer 1. And so I just count that as like purely incremental to demand for L1 block space. Like the L1 block space demand doesn't go away. I don't think. There's some proportion of users who are using L1 today who once L2s come online, they're like, I'm never going to use L1 again. My suspicion, based on absolutely fucking nothing at all, is that that's like almost nobody. That like everyone who's transacting on L1 today will continue to transact on L1 today because you know, if I describe a blockchain to you that's like absurdly expensive to use and slow and like has all these issues, like that is Ethereum today and people are still using it. So like there's no, and there's a reason they're using it. And the reason they're using it is because it's like hyper secure and it's like ultra lindy. And like there's a whole bunch of another class that's like they want free instant settlement, blah, blah, blah. Those people are all on alt L1. So like I think of L2s as just like purely competitive with alt L1s, and they're just adding incremental demand for L1 block space.
And therefore, what do you think in terms of like demand for block space on L1? Like, do you think
just
it
goes
will
up.
like or L2?
Yeah, it just goes up. Like L1 because like, you know, all of those like, you know, 20,000 transactions or whatever, you know, on L2, they'll be like compressed into like a couple you know, a couple transactions on L1, which maybe it doesn't move the needle as much on L1, but it's not sucking the demand out of L1 either. Like I definitely don't think that's the case.
Got it. Interesting.
Oh yeah. I'm on the side that I think demand will definitely outpace supply over the next few years.
Wow.
Like by some factor. I mean, it'll eventually catch up as layer 2 solutions really scale fully, but I think it'll be a while.
Interesting.
Itamar's has his hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I don't think it's necessarily just a supply and demand thing. I think there's also like an element of like, I guess like a game theoretic way to say it would be like information asymmetry, where you might get certain like MEV risk on different chains, and more so than the like demand for the block space. That might be an effect on that, which is kind of something that I feel like was up in the air beyond just being defined in the readings. Like I think the cross-chain MEV thing is going to be like a huge impact on like how easy is it going to be for your stuff on one place to interact with other stuff without kind of being like what's it called, like having value extracted like along the way of your transaction. I think that's also, yeah.
Yeah, like to complement that, I think it's kind of unclear how like bots and bots looking for arbitrage or whatever else, liquidations, how that's going to scale with like the various complexities that are coming about. The more layer 1s that are compatible and bridges and everything else, the more that will scale up. I mean, you look at Solana, like Solana's having a problem right now exactly because of that. So I think that's definitely an open question.
Is your sort of thesis around this on L2, David, like basically a function of like how you see Solana being used today, where it's like a lot more machines and bots and that sort of thing as opposed to users, and just like all of those things growing as a function of?
Oh yeah, I mean, I wonder what like proportion of transactions are just going to be bots trying to scoop up little beats, just MEV stuff. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot. And yeah, I think it's really unclear how that's going to scale. But I think like Solana will be a good kind of litmus test or whatever going forward. We'll see as Solana scales up. faster, before anything else. We'll kind of see that play out. But I mean, that's just one ecosystem, right? So when you add the complexities of everything else, I mean, geez, the amount of computational power to keep things like efficient, even, across all those markets.
I'm curious to hear what people think about, like, this might be like a naive way to think about it, but just thinking about like what happens in the non-Web3 world, also like in terms of, there's like all those charts. I feel like Facebook has put charts out like that of like how much data they like store, and it like goes up exponentially. There's just, I think there's a lot of like, there is the demand there, right? Like right now, if you were like, hey, the Ethereum can scale infinitely and the transactions cost nothing, people would rush to build applications. But they're not right now, because they're like, at this price point, I can't provide a compelling alternative service to some Web 2 service, right? And so like, as soon as any of those shift, you'll see like the Web 2 version go out. And I think there's a question too, which is like, does all data end up live on the blockchain? And there's like no more non-decentralized databases, which would be like a dramatic shift, but like maybe, right? Like maybe it just becomes more convenient over time, and actually you're like, yeah, might as well put it on this thing instead of having it like service.
But you don't mean actually living on chain. I mean, you mean like kind of like verifiable on chain and pointable to from chain.
Maybe I guess it just depends how all of that evolves, and like what are the like price aspects of it. There's also like there's like the write cost, like what's the read cost on these things as well. And like like that's going to be like a factor too. But I think I have a feeling like the demand is always latent, right? Anytime there's like, to your point, Blake, of like anytime like traffic roads open up, right? Like people are like, oh, I can do video now on the web. Oh, I can do holograms or whatever. Like let's put right, like the people try to find ways. I don't know how Moore's law has gone with that, and I also don't know if it affects the compute price. Like storage is net cheaper. I don't really know what that means though. Overall, it just means you can do different things.
It is interesting. Yeah, go. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to like add on to David's point about the efficiency, which is kind of what I was trying to say, where you have this like cost of keeping things efficient across domains. And I think that's gonna be a large factor in deciding kind of who can stay more efficient more easily. And like it can be a bunch of stuff. It can be stuff like how resistant mechanisms on this chain or the other are to MEV, or it can be things like the volition framework of like having data availability solutions competing around that, which I think that seems to be something that is like still very much an open question. Hopefully this year we'll start seeing more work on that.
Does anybody want to talk about the MEV stuff? I didn't have any specific points that I wanted to make or questions that I wanted to ask. I just seemed relevant to this conversation. Cool. It exists. We can move on. So are we all kind of in consensus that the sort of traffic analogy like flows here, where like there'll just be kind of infinite demand for transactions that are cheaper, and we'll just build more and more stuff and kind of just saturate that. It really is like this latent demand that just kind of gets unlocked by L2.
I think that's accurate, because unlike EOS, there's some utility, and so it's the same surfaces that people use, just better, faster, cheaper. So I think that would lead to more engagement over time, and I think that it's just going to new primitives create new utilities, and it's just going to continue on, and new problems.
Sure. I'm curious. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to kind of thinking back on just like your question around price and supply and demand. Just one kind of side note was I was thinking from kind of some hedge fund days around, when analysts are trying to get a read on Netflix's growth. I mean, they're looking at leading indicators on broadband penetration in specific jurisdictions, and so I think that there's probably like a cluster of regulatory and then just kind of basic technology factors that we might need to consider, and in addition to just the price dynamics in and of itself. Overall, I think kind of agree with David's point. I do think that more space means more opportunities, bigger sandbox, more people to play in. But I think it's going to take the transaction cost getting to where people that are living in the third world and developing nations can actually get a little bit more utility out of it before it really get a big spike in adoption or a bigger step function. And that's why I think that's what's so exciting about what's happening with L2s and ZKs in particular.
And Solana.
Up for it. Totally.
I'm curious, like on that point of what you were just saying, like thinking about it in like those hedge fund ways, like it made me think about like what's happening with like AWS pricing, and like probably they compete around the cost of providing the service with the other cloud providers, and like are just like somewhere very close to that. And I wonder if anyone's tried to be like, what's the cost of actually running Ethereum right now, and how far away are we from like the cost of running this network? But yeah, I do wonder if it ends up, yeah, because like it's almost like you bought AWS credits, but you're speculating that they're going to give you something. I don't know what you're speculating on there. Makes me troubled by holding Ethereum at times. These calls have made me increasingly troubled.
Oh, I see it. I see it as just like you're purchasing money when you know it's going to be more expensive. You're purchasing credits because you know they're going to be more expensive later, right? Like you're buying future gas money today.
Are they more expensive though? Because the price of the compute goes down over time. Like it's hard for me to like reason about. Like it's like storage just became way cheaper. So
wait, hold on. This is why this is not the correct analogy in my mind, right?
Yeah, is this the wrong analogy? That's kind of
I think that's just the totally wrong analogy. I think you should delete that from your brain. Like, right? Like the cost of Ethereum compute does not go down. Like the amount of Ethereum block space like does not go up, right? Like you can't just like make more of it outside of L2, but like layer 1 block space, like there's just a fixed amount of it, and if demand goes up, then people have to pay more in ETH.
Sure, but yeah, I mean that also assumes that like the block space is like priced as a function of supply and demand, right? Which is like not clear.
I think the block space in Gwei, absolutely is, but maybe I'm not thinking about this correctly now, which is just like, yeah, there's the price of ETH and then there's the price of block space. Like the price of block space continues to march upward because there's just more demand in ETH for ETH block space. So like Gwei pricing, gas pricing keeps going up. The price of ETH in US dollar terms is kind of like that's like a separate thing.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to look at Bitcoin because it's older and more mature, further on in its life cycle. So like Bitcoin blocks are not full. I was just looking at some of the charts. Like I think that Bitcoin found an equilibrium. I mean, there was a lot of volatility in block size and fees back in like 2017 into 2018. Like you guys probably remember, those of you who have been around for a while, when Bitcoin fees were like $50, $100.
Yep.
I feel like it's flattened out, and they're not fully like. The way that someone who understands Bitcoin better than I do put it was like Bitcoin block space is very well utilized. And I think what we've seen is stuff has been pushed to layer 2 in the case of Lightning, or probably even more than that, it's been pushed to Ethereum and other chains. So my feeling is a little bit different. I actually think that layer 1 block space is not infinitely like elastic. I think that we're going to find an equilibrium, kind of like Bitcoin has.
But there's so much less to do on layer 1 Bitcoin than there is to like settle on layer 1 Ethereum. Right?
I agree, but I would make the case that there's a lot less to do on layer 1 Ethereum than in layer 2 Ethereum. I think it's the same effect.
I think back to like what Blake was originally saying, which is like what's driving the price of this thing, right? Like I don't think that Bitcoin people think of as like a compute platform. For I mean I could be wrong. This is like, but like in this like largely like now it's
compute, but block space. They do talk about it. So what you are is you're buying block space.
I feel like people have the analogy of gold and they think of it as like a speculative asset that like we've all agreed has like some like arbitrary value to some extent.
I think Bitcoin, this is just a gut feeling, is 80-20 in favor of the gold analogy, the store of value. Ethereum is 80-20 in the other direction. Like it's 20% monetary premium and 80% you're paying for compute and block space.
Exactly. So like they're like, yeah, exactly. But so it just, I feel like that's going to be a big thing of like which of these two models do people decide to value this thing on? Is it gold or is it compute?
I think that that ratio on an Ethereum is actually changing, and it's like going to more towards the gold analogy. That's definitely my sense.
Can we try like a thought experiment really quickly? Like, let's say tomorrow, if Ethereum's price, I don't know what it is right now, 3,000, right? Let's say it went to like $100 tomorrow. What would be like different? Like, I guess like the argument we would make, right? If Ethereum fell to $100 tomorrow, we would say, well, you'd be able to buy block space at 90% off, right? And what we're saying is like, there would be a lot more demand for that block space, right? So the price of Ethereum should, like, if we just get rid of speculators, like, let's just like pretend like Ethereum actually trades as a function of supply and demand. What we're saying is that we believe block space would be artificially cheap temporarily, right? And so people would start transacting more. They would buy more Ethereum, right, at the margin, up until it no longer was economically like rational for them. Like, let's say, like, you know, they're not buying Ethereum for their parents' generation, you know, the children's generation, whatever. Like, and it should rise until the like real utility level, I guess, of the network. And that's a function kind of the casino that we've built, right? Like, people are essentially transacting on Ethereum, and they will pay $100 if they believe they can make $100 and one on a yield farm, or like something like that, right? Is that?
I think the only factor you're missing is the security factor, right? So especially in a proof, I mean, this is also true in a proof of work world, but it's especially true in a proof of stake world. If the asset loses 95% of its value, then by definition, the chain's lost 95% of its security. And so that's a counterbalance. People might say, oh, I don't want to do billion-dollar transactions on Ethereum anymore. I want to move them to, I don't know, Solana or Bitcoin or something.
I just want to go back to the original premise, which like I think we've been very pilled by like ZKs, of which I'm a part of, and I'm like shilling the ZK narrative of just like, why do we think layer 2s are actually going to be better than layer 1s? Like, I actually think there are very, very distinct trade-offs between layer 1s and layer 2s, right? Where like layer 2s actually sacrifice centralization. And like, I know we've kind of hand-waved this, and like ZK Sync and Starkware have done a really good job of hand-waving it as well. But like for the foreseeable future, there's just going to be like single-digit rollup providers that are very centralized points of like network stoppage for like every single L2. And like Arbitrum had a very public network stoppage where their centralized sequencer went down. And so like very distinct trade-off. Modular Ethereum, eminently more scalable and reliant on this like other logic, which is just like modularity and like software improving mechanisms, versus like Solana, which is just like Moore's law. Like build the fastest fucking computers, like put them in a server farm, and like we'll scale using hardware.
And you still and Solana still has downtime.
And Solana still has downtime. So like, but maybe like AVAX doesn't, or you know, like they're kind of more premised on just like centralized hardware scaling, just like build the fastest computer, and then like put them in like 1,000 data centers, just ship them to the four corners of the world, and like that's our censorship resistant strategy. It's like why are we convinced that like why are we convinced that like L2s are going to have immediately more throughput than like a Solana, given that it's not like objectively superior across every metric? Oh yeah, Itamar.
I'm just not sure that the two are mutually exclusive. Like you could run Zk Rollup on Solana or like Avalanche.
For sure. I guess I mean specifically rollups on Ethereum versus all layer 1s.
I mean, I personally am not convinced that ETH is a better L1 for rollups than the other ones, but that's just me here, I think.
John, it sounds like you're saying the problem with L2s, your main issue is centralization of the sequencer?
Yeah, I don't know if it's my problem. It's just like, okay, I'm a user, right? And I have used Solana, and I think that's the only alt L1 I've actually used. Probably like missed like a bunch of farming on other chains. But it's like, okay, well, why haven't I done that, right? And like, I think that's a question like we have to ask of users globally. Like, why would they choose an Ethereum layer 2 over an alt L1? And I'm like, either there's just a better casino game, like better farming rewards, like some better Ponzi system, or there's just definitively a better narrative about like security and kind of like performance and those trade-offs. And like that, I think, has been pushed very heavily by the Ethereum community, but it's like not clear that it's actually superior. Like that narrative is actually superior.
Definitely. And like, there's like the elephant in the room is like, where do the developers want to develop? And I think there's been it's been difficult. I think Optimism and Arbitrum, like, I think they just assumed that all the developers would flock over and build everything on these layer 2s, and it hasn't happened just because there's added complexity. And I think that's why Solana is just seeing such explosive growth, because it's just so much easier when everything is in one ecosystem. It's so much easier to compose, and you don't have to think about, is this the right layer 2 solution? You know, the questions like that. Where do I want to? Do I want to live on Polygon? Do I want to live on an optimistic rollup? Do I want to wait for a Zk rollup? Like, what am I going to do? Whereas Solana, everything just kind of fits together. It's all, you know, it's all written in the same with the same infrastructure. It's so it's definitely a good question. But I think maybe
want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add that, like, if you're looking at users and stuff, the TVL for like Terra and Solana and AVAX has like shot up through the roof the past 6 months. So like, there is like, people are going elsewhere.
But I think it'd be hard. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm thinking about what Lane said about that whole idea of like Bitcoin and the trade-off between like price and security. And it does seem like there's this like idea that like, right, like fundamentally there was this innovation of, hey, monetary incentives can provide decentralized computing platforms and like some security mechanism. And what I was just trying to reason about in my head is like, you know, like in the early days of the web, there were like other competitors to the web that were like for pay solutions. And then like the web came out and like everyone was just like, okay, it's not worth it for me to make a competitor to this anymore because like it's free. And I don't know exactly what I'm like getting at, because like it's hard for me to like reason about, because like here the monetary incentives are critical to providing the service in some way, where like the same wasn't necessarily true for the web, though there was a lot of businesses that decided to subsidize it because of like the secondary things that would come out of like it working well, right? They were like, okay, let's just figure out a way to fund this thing. And I guess there might be like other incentives beyond the immediate monetary incentive to fund something like these decentralized platforms.
I want to combine a couple of threads. First of all, I just love having David relentlessly shilling Solana. It's so unusual in crypto. I see. Get a little diversity of perspective instead of all you people. Nikolai and I have been talking a little bit about like, what does the future of sort of computation look like? And, you know, he was sort of playing with the idea that like maybe all of the web, like everything ends up getting built on blockchains, right? Like what is that like true in the future? Is everything just better on a blockchain? Something that John said is basically like, you know, he's kind of going through the trough of sorrow. Like he got super excited about crypto and now he's like, oh, it's all just a fucking casino. It's all, you know, it's all bullshit. And I think we've probably all kind of gone through that journey. And so I'm curious, like, if scalability happens and DKs work and all this stuff, like, is the demand just coming from more casino bullshit, or like, are we actually going to start making something useful from these like decentralized, permissionless, amazing things that were going to like change the world?
I think just to jump in, I mean, there's the regulatory overhang is pretty big, but I think that Ratside warming up to at least Aave and trying to get some DeFi exposure. So I think that be interesting to see how that works out. But I think a lot of it is that, there's in the most popular jurisdictions, there's not that many, what look to be like legit fintech companies that can operate here. And from my standpoint, I feel like until the Fed play nice with Silvergate, a lot of those apps that have real utility won't necessarily be able to exist in our markets, or they'll just be about hamstring. I think one of the bigger crypto banks is kind of like a choke point for the U.S. financial infrastructure for that. I think that was kind of built too, because they basically went off for. But I feel like the real, and then so I feel like we have like the best kind of like DeFi banks we have that are really just kind of casinos where you just lose money by keeping your stuff in there because. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go. I think regulation will be a big part of it, but I feel like a lot of the experiments in the last 3 months have been kind of a reminder why we can't have nice things.
Wayne?
Yeah, I think my quick response is, I think, first of all, it's a great question. I think it's a question in everyone's mind. It's like the $1 trillion question. I think everything that touches value, without a doubt, will move on to blockchain in some form or another. Like I probably wouldn't have said that a year ago, but now that I think L2s are maturing and it's becoming clear that like you can actually do things that scale, I think the answer is yes, but I'm much less optimistic and bullish about the data case. I think we have not yet seen, like Web3 has this promise of people owning their data. Like I've not yet seen any application do this well. So I'm hopeful about that part, but I'm curious what other people think about the data side.
Can you say more about like in what sense you haven't? Like what is the vision that you're like questioning in terms of the data ownership piece?
I mean, look at what are the top 10 apps that you use on a daily basis. For me, these are things like messaging apps like Telegram and Signal and email and calendar, like Slack, like I don't know, what's another good category of things like task management type stuff, photos. All my data, all of it still lives in the cloud on some third-party companies, like some unaccountable, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, this kind of stuff, right? None of that has begun to shift towards Web3 in any meaningful way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like, I guess the question is in what way, right? I guess the question that I would have around it, and I've like thought about this too, because like I was just at this company that we like focus on integrations of APIs for a long time. And I have been recently thinking about like what happens to integrations in the like blockchain world. Make easier in some way. I guess the promise was in part that you could like go to an application and be like, hey, I have my data with me. I have my like friend network with me. 100%. I have my whatever with me.
That's Web3. I mean, by the way, what you're describing, that was the initial description of what Web3 was supposed to be. Right. And there are still projects like Urbit that are working on this to some extent, like the Hollow Chains and the Secure Scuttlebutts are doing this, but like they haven't taken off.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I don't know. My personal view is like I'm pretty bullish that that's going to happen, and you're going to have data that you can like access. I was like thinking about like Mirror's case where like it's kind of like murky. Like, do you own your Mirror posts? Like they write it to Arweave. Like, what does it mean that I own my posts on Mirror?
I think Moxie, I think I agree with what Moxie said in his post a couple of weeks ago. His whole point was people don't want to run servers, period, full stop. And all this data stuff is predicated upon, like Urbit's a great example of people running their own servers. So I'm much less optimistic.
Yeah, but hold on, let me jump in there because again, I don't mean to shill Solana constantly. It's just kind of like no, but it's just where things are happening first. So it's like a litmus test. And so there's so Genesis Go actually owns like they provide the infrastructure for like all like half the RPC nodes, I don't know, something like that on Solana, which are what provide the data. And actually they've just decentralized the whole thing. And so it's happening, like decentralized data storage, so, and they're going to be competing directly with Arweave soon. So they're going to have data storage as well. So, that kind of stuff, it's in the pipe. And I think paying attention to Solana, even if you don't like Solana, just paying attention to see like what's getting built there and what's going on is definitely a good idea.
So, I mean, Filecoin, like IPFS was supposed to fix this, it failed. You know, StoreJ and other projects, Filecoin was supposed to fix this and it's failed. Now there's Arweave, maybe Genesis Go, but the point remains, and I think that Moxie put this really clearly. People do not want to run their own servers.
I don't fully understand why you have to run your own server though.
Like otherwise, what's the point? I mean, it's someone else holding your data, right?
Right. But like I could imagine, and I don't know, John. You said some things about encryption in Aztec, and I didn't really like. It definitely like made me think about like. It seems like in part it's like, hey, am I able to store, right? Like I don't want my Telegram messages to be publicly readable on the chain. So like, how does encryption work on chain? Am I able to like securely store data on chain that's like encrypted that like I somehow know that I'm like the only one that can decrypt it, or I can like give selective access to people similar to like
just store an encrypted blob.
Yeah, and then like what does like the OAuth mechanisms look like for applications? OAuth analogy.
Well, you download the encrypted blog and you decrypt the blob and you decrypt it locally.
Yeah.
I mean, Blockstack built that 5 years ago and no one uses it. Like the UX is horrible.
Yeah. That might be more of a criticism of wallets and how the experience is today there.
I think it's the keys. I think that's the key. I mean, this is such a basic thing, but no one's figured out like robust key management. Like if you lose your keys, you lose your data permanently. No one wants that.
Yeah.
It's promising because of Argent is a really nice wallet solution, and that's kind of what they're using for everything. Like the social key recovery, I think that's like a good UX personally.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
There's another wallet, Taurus, that has the ability to like.
Yeah, but then you're sacrificing security of like private keys for just your like stupid like OAuth password. You know, it's Facebook OAuth or whatever.
Yeah. Kind of fun to go back to a world before autosave though, where you're like, I could lose all my data at any second.
Just hard mode life.
On the edge, yeah, exactly. Hard mode your digital existence.
I think it's going to be a hard sell until the applications are better than what we have now, and right now.
It's a real hard sell.
Not the case.
It's pretty stressful.
But in terms of, I had one question around censorship resistance for this.
Can you speak up, Parker? I can't really hear you.
Yeah, I just had one question around censorship resistance for sequencers for L2s. I mean, I barely understand this, but my understanding is that it's just incredibly computationally intensive to write the proofs. So there's some centralized hardware that's necessary, and then whatever's emitted is basically reconciled. But in terms of like, just to unpack that, does that mean that there's typically is that software itself licensed and shut down so it can be run by multiple node operators, or like could somebody try and unpack that? I'm curious, like where the centralization of the validators like really comes into play from like a hardware perspective.
Yeah, you have to run a super expensive piece of hardware. And so if you have like some crazy Xeon server sitting somewhere, you're paying like an enormous bill to run that machine and construct rollup proofs. That's it. Not everyone wants to do that. And like, unless we build network incentives for people to do so and like reduce hardware requirements largely by making proving mechanisms more efficient, like there just won't be that many. It'll be like Solana, right? It's just like gigantic servers, and it'll have to be like institutional grade, and like there'll be some kind of like CapEx investment to like, make your return. Like you won't be able to construct, you can construct, but you won't be able to construct gigantic rollup proofs like locally.
And in terms of cost, is it kind of like a Red Queen effect where you just those, or do you expect any sort of diminishing costs over time for the hardware?
Not really.
I think as proving gets better, like as ZK proving algorithms get better, like there should be a reduction, right? Like essentially, like if we can recurse like more proofs into smaller and smaller pieces, then constructing a rollup will be cheaper and cheaper.
Do you think there'd be ASICs for that over time, or?
I think our team's approach is basically like, first of all, it doesn't make like capital sense to like invest in designing an ASIC unless you build like, unless you print like a whole ton of them. And like, you just won't ever really print a whole ton of rollup providers because like, it's probably not necessary, right? And so this is a question of like how much decentralization is enough decentralization, which is, well-trod ground like in the Solana debate. if you think you need 30,000 machines, then maybe. But also ZK proving technology changes like every month. Like this is bleeding edge research, so it'll be a really long time before it's like a stable enough situation where there's like an ASIC that is meant for a specific type of ZK circuit.
And in terms of subsidizing those, is that pretty much like just like grants from the foundations of the L1 plus investment capital from, you know, the entity that's building them? Or like curious if like those expenses are clubbed or if they're just taken down by the single entity typically?
Every roll up right now just runs their own centralized sequencer.
Got it. It's cool. Thanks. Interesting. Well, thanks, guys.
But on that point, right? Like Vitalik's whole post was kind of like, we don't care about centralization of sequencers, and that's the magic of rollups. Right?
Got it.
It's not a concerning thing to be centralized.
I mean, you kind of just don't agree with that. Yeah, that seems, yeah.
If you can provide credible neutrality, do you still need to be as decentralized? That's something I've been trying to understand.
Well, it's interesting because it seems like there's kind of like an impedance mismatch on the philosophy where, I mean, I could see this leading to where, sure, you have this Wild West Ethereum L1 layer, but then there's basically just a whole bunch of like little walled gardens, and that's practically the only place that users engage with. And, you know, their funds might be locked, might not be transferable, might just be lip service. And I could just basically seeing us, you know, spending all this time to build something that winds up looking very similar to how it does now over time.
What do you mean by how it does now, and like in the current blockchain space, or
just typical power creating, and you know, more, you know, just the Lindy effect of the winners, you know, getting bigger, and then just, you know, more moats to prevent competition over time. But I don't know. I just don't know what that interplay is going to look like between, particularly if, like, you know, there's a lot of different regulatory arbitrage that different rollup providers might need to, you know, account for. I think that could lead to a lot of fragmentation. But I'm just kind of curious to see like what that semi-permeable membrane could look like over time. I don't really have a clear view.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is like when you have something like centralized, like Starkware. I mean, isn't that government? Like, can government step in and censor that? I mean,
so
in some way that I don't know.
In the ZK world, like the sort of trade-off you get is like you can centralize the sequencer, but the magic of sort of like the ZK proofs is essentially you can't ever like create an invalid state, right? So no one can steal your funds. The worst they can do is ever censor your ability to like move the funds temporarily. So it's kind of like a liveness guarantee that you're sort of like sacrificing.
But from what I understand, like, if someone can just pop up their own like sequencer, you know, if the code's open source, then let's say like government shuts down Starkware, someone else can just like clone the repos, like end up an AWS thing and start sequencing proofs again, right?
But isn't there some period of time where it's just like it's on the ZK side? Is there no period of time where it's you know, where it can be, you know, stopped midway, and like I guess I don't know the infrastructure well enough.
What do you mean stopped midway? Midway through
well,
what?
I mean, so like before it gets back to Ethereum, if it's just, you know, being processed by ZK, and then ZK, like what happens? Like what happens if I make a bunch of transactions, is being processed by ZK, do those get canceled, aborted? And if so, that's, you know, that's bad. That could be bad timing wise. Like, sure, no one could steal my funds, but if someone timed that properly, then they could. You know.
Yeah, that's the data availability problem, essentially, right? Like you could, you know, like I think Raf gave this example in the chat a while ago. Like, let's say you have like some like treasury governance vote or something on like, I don't know, like reallocating the treasury somehow, and like a bunch of people vote on it. Data availability committee could just like close off like data availability to this once they reach a quorum that they want and stop people from like counter voting. Then the thing passes, then they like make the data available again. And that's kind of like the problem there, where you're dependent on like the data availability being decentralized enough, or like incentive alignment there somehow that guarantees some access to it regardless of incentives. Or like
it's like the attack vector is like a temporal attack vector, right? It's like your funds can never be stolen. No one can ever kind of like cheat you, but like
to phrase it, it's like the liveness only. That's the problem, right?
Which of course is going to create all sorts of like things, game theoretic things that we haven't thought about yet, where we're like, oh, well, let's move this to L2, and then like smart people will be like, what if I hold this up right at the right time, you know?
Yeah, can't wait for like curve wars, but for like DDoSing each other, you know?
We're way over time. I want to let everyone return to their lives. David, it's great to meet you. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, Blake.
Thanks, Blake.
Thanks
guys.
for doing it.
Yes.
Have a good one.
Blake, are you coming to Costa Rica with Nikolai?
I would actually say Nikolai's coming to Costa Rica with me.
Okay, I'm in Costa Rica right now, by the way.
Where are you?
I'm in Santa Teresa. I mean, Nikolai just called me up, and we realized how serendipitous it was. So I'm pretty excited.
Awesome. How long are you there for?
I'm here for 2 months.
Oh, sweet.
Escaping the Canadian winter.
Same. And where do you know where in Santa Teresa you are? Like what you're near?
I'm in Manzanillo, which is like 20 minutes.
Right.
20 minutes north of Santa Teresa, and I'm figuring out my the problem of how I'm gonna get to Santa Teresa every day. I think I'm gonna buy an ATV and like sell it after a couple months. I think that's my best solution.
Are there ATVs for sale?
It's not easy. I got one. I might be buying one for 4,000 today, and then sell it in a couple months. And if I get 3,000 for it, I'm happy, after 2 months. But who knows? Because like by then it's like the end of the high season, so might be tricky. But I'm gonna have to roll that dice. There's literally no better solution. I mean, if you try to like rent something for 2 months, it's like almost like the same price. It's crazy.
It's really.
And I didn't think it would be that way. So I don't know. The alternative is to get like a motorbike, which is fine, but I'll probably kill myself if I do that.
Yeah, I mean, death on those things is actually like not a joke. It's very common. I have friends that have had friends that died.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with like the windy, like jungly roads with that like aren't lit very well, and there's like roots popping up all over the place. Like
yeah, it is no joke. And then if you add like alcohol to the mix or anything like that, it's and no helmet like people typically do. It's just like absolute
God. So you're gonna be in Santa Teresa for a couple months too, right? Starting like in a week or so.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I'm stoked, man. I'm happy you guys are coming by. That's so cool.
Yeah,
I'm
super pumped. Are you committed to Manzanilla or are you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I got a place for a month, but it's tough to find places, man. Like, well, I'm committed here for a month, anyways. But yeah, you guys got a place lined up, I guess, already, right?
Yeah, we have 2 different spots, one for February and one for March.
Oh, cool.
It's crazy how much like prices have really.
I know. I can't believe it. It almost stopped me from coming, but I'm happy I'm here. But yeah, I'm gonna be in Santa Teresa. I'm gonna be there every day. I'm gonna be riding in, and I'll be at Salina North.
Oh, okay. You got a card. Sweet.
Yep.
And when did you get there?
Like 3 days ago or so.
Okay. We have a buddy who's already down there. If you're looking for people to connect with, hang out with.
Cool. Yeah. Shoot me his contact. I don't know if you have my email or something. Is it in the like?
I'll ping Nikolai now.
Yeah.
I'll tell him to send you. He obviously knows this friend as well.
Is it a crypto guy?
Not a crypto guy, but
yeah, whatevs. Yeah.
software guy. Cool guy.
Cool.
And what else was I gonna say? You've never been to Santa Teresa before, right? That's the first time.
No, yeah, first time.
What brought you there?
I was looking for some, like, I like to, like, I've done this a couple times where I've like just fucked off